obviously, but like during his.
Yeah, during his time, because Capitol used to be in Philadelphia, then they moved it to DC. But that was after he was president. Hey, folks. So today it is October the 29th, and we're going to pick up with our lecture regarding Great Depression. So we left off talking last time about Black Thursday. And remember, I don't ask you to memorize a lot of dates, but I do want you to know that the Great Depression starts in 1929. That's something you should know. It's something that you may find helpful whenever you take your next essay portion of your test. But I'm not going to lie, more than likely, your next test, your essay portion is probably going to do with World War II, honestly. I might give you a choice, but it's probably going to do with World War II. Because we're not going to take our next test till after we're done talking about World War II.
That's a lot.
Hey, a lot of stuff happens, and that's the thing too. Whenever you study history, if you study ancient history, you don't get a lot of facts per decade because it's so spread across centuries, right? But you get a lot of facts spread across the centuries. In American history, America is a really young country, so you get a lot of facts per decade. But like if you look at it as a whole, it's not that much happening in a short amount of time. Like if you're going to study like an ancient society, like ancient classical Greeks or something like that, yeah, you'd have less facts as you move along per decade. All right, folks. So during this time period, there, of course, remember we talked about marketing was something that would influence regular people. Well, another thing too that influenced people's buying was buying things on credit, buying it in installments. You know, like a car note or a mortgage. Yes. Yes, you can. And so more and more Americans were doing this, but more and more Americans were doing buying things on loans outside of their means. They were spending more money than they were making on average, and that's going to catch up with people. There's a lot of things that go into the Great Depression, both how the country and the individual. Yeah.
So they weren't aware of how much debt could burden someone.
I don't think some people were, and I think some people saw hope in a way to get out of it. Kind of like how some things were going. Well, it's like that today. Like payday loan place, title loan places, credit cards. That crushes families today. People will get in a situation or they'll have like an emergency, and next thing you know, they're taking out so much, putting it on credit with super high interest rates that they ruin themselves. They can't work their way out of it. So it could have been something similar to that. Some things too, sometimes people, they don't think of the consequences. They make a purchase and then they don't really think about how they're going to pay for it. Or they don't look at the long game. They only see like, hey, I got paid today. I've got money. Therefore, it's okay for me to spend. But they don't think about the other bills that are coming. And that's part of like adulting. Yeah, you can get away with that. You can get away with that when you're living with your parents. But when you're out of the household, you can't really get away with that. That's how you wind up losing stuff. All right, so Great Depression. As stated before, the causes of the Great Depression were multifaceted. So that means there was a lot of reasons. Product over production. One of the things about the Great Depression is agriculture, like farming. It didn't really grow that much at this time. It grew before it. It kind of stagnated. But industry, like making products, they made way too many things. And when you make too much stuff, you have its prices go down. And if the price goes down too much, it costs more to make an item than it does for it to sell. So you're losing money on all the things you made. Storing items cost money. So that's a problem. Industries really overdid it. Poor distribution of income. So what this means is though the nation got more and more wealthy, over time in the roaring 20s, we see that so many people are using credit systems that the super rich are getting richer, but normal people, they're having less and less value. Too much unstable credit. So banks were giving out loans to people who didn't have a reasonable way to pay it back. And if people default on loans, all a bank can do is collect what we call collateral. So like, let's say you want to buy a house. So you might put up things for collateral, such as your car and other things like that, or you might have somebody else co-sign with you and they'll put up things they have. And if you don't pay it, they take back the house and they'll take your car and whatever they can to try to make the money back.
Wait, so that's what I mean, we co-sign?
Well, co-sign means that if you default on the loan, like let's say I co-sign, let's say I was hitting the head with a rock and I co-sign a loan with you. And that means if you stop paying the loan, I got to pay it. Oh, yeah. So like a lot of parents do that for student loans for kids and stuff. And then the kid didn't pay it. Now the parents got to pay it. And then the kid ain't picking up the phone. And they're wondering why nobody sees each other at Christmas. So that could be a problem, right? It could be a problem. So be careful. Be careful who you get tied up with financially. Uneven economic growth. We just mentioned that. Now, one historian, and some other historians as well, such as Amity Slade, pointed out that one of the reasons that the Great Depression got so bad is, we're going to see later, it's because of tariffs. So you might not remember this, but in 8th grade, we tend to talk about tariffs a bit because tariffs are a tax on things coming in from another country. But if you do too much of that, other countries will tax you, and then you wind up not buying from each other because everything's too expensive. And if people aren't buying each other's stuff, companies can't sell stuff. Companies can't sell stuff, they don't need you to work anymore. So then everybody loses their job and everything stinks. It's one thing that happens here. Well, yeah, that's a big part of it. But of course, another part of that, yeah, it's different in this, because in this, people are being told not to work. Whereas in this, other countries just stop trading. Because a lot of countries still want to trade right now because they still need things. But it's hard with the pandemic because people have restrictions not letting them go to
How
work.
long is this pandemic supposed to last?
At first, they said 2 weeks.
Well, I don't think that's possible.
Now some of them are saying, oh, just a couple more years.
What about
Some of them are
the-
saying,
Most
I'm
pandemics-
tired of
6
wearing this
months.
mask.
What about
Most
the after
pandemics
effects of
last
the pandemic?
3 years.
There's
What
this
about the
pandemic, it
after
lasts
effects
like,
of the
I think,
pandemic?
4 years.
Well, usually after one of these things, you have an economic rebound and stuff. Everybody's going back to normal. And so spending and investment and stuff like that goes through the roof. There's more jobs available and stuff.
So, what about the SARS? How long did that last? Was it like 4 years?
Well, the thing is about SARS, I think lasted for a while. SARS didn't really spread to America. They stopped. SARS wasn't nearly as contagious. It was much more deadly, but it wasn't so contagious. And so was another one that was related to it, MERS. Like MERS was like almost killed everyone who got it, but it didn't spread that easy, right? But both of those were coronaviruses too.
Really?
Yeah, but they were different kind of coronaviruses. Like there's like a million different flus,
We
right?
got the boss.
I mean, we got the one going around now that's extremely contagious, but thankfully, it seems like most people are coming out of it okay on the other end. Though there are some people who are definitely at risk, and that's why they had the mask and people staying home. It's like, nope, the reason we let schools go on, people aren't worried about young people, because young people almost always make it. But just worried about you mostly getting at homes, like older people and people with health issues, so. Yeah, so we're trying to watch out because we don't know what long-term effects it could be on
I
little
just
ones.
hope this thing's over soon.
All right, back to this. By 1929, the U.S. had 513 millionaires. However, most Americans spent almost all their monthly incomes on housing, food, and products. So they're spending all of their money and then supplementing their pay with credit. So you're starting to see something where some historians point out that during this time, advertisement gets really good about telling people how they should live in order to be happier. You see that today too, all the time. Ads are always with smiling people who are happier because they buy a product. Well, people were going for that back then. So they were spending too much money to try to get to that level of happiness. Individual debt was skyrocketing. In 1919, Americans spent $100 million in credit buying. So that's just once again, through loans and early credit card type systems and stuff like that. By 1929, it grew to $7 billion, with much of that money being used to buy stocks. So 1919, it was only $100 million in credit. 1929, $7 billion of back then money. So that's an extremely large amount of money that somebody owes to somebody else. And a lot of people are using that money that they owe to other people to buy stocks, which we're going to see, as we see, became mostly worthless. And so that's one of the things where people are going to gamble, Americans are going to gamble away a lot of their wealth. So this thing is all risky. And there was no forms of insurance for these businesses or for these individuals who were losing their money. Once it was lost, it was just gone. So it's like vapor. So does that make sense? People they're using credit cards basically to buy lotto tickets, and then they lost all the lotto tickets. So it's kind of what it's like. All right, so during this time period, we're going to see a lot of the nation's banks are going to start falling apart and failing. Almost none of the banks in the nation had insurance either. So if a bank crashed, it vanished, and so did all the money deposited. But another thing too, there was no laws in how much money a bank had to have on hand. So most banks only had like 5% or less of all the money people deposited in the bank. The rest of it was loaned out to do things for like to give loans to individuals and businesses, right? Because that's how banks make money, is they make loans. And sometimes they buy and sell property. So whenever people want to get their money out of the banks, they're going to find out it's actually not there. When the stock market crashed, corporations cut production and laid off workers. So now businesses don't need people to work for them. Consumer confidence dropped, and so less was being purchased. When consumer confidence drops, that's an indicator to economists that people would rather save their money than spend it. Saving your money can be very safe in short term, but if everybody saves their money, then businesses can't work. And that's kind of what happened during COVID. At first, whenever we had the lockdowns, people weren't able to spend their money, or they didn't want to because they were worried. And so that caused more businesses to fall. Banks were less willing to lend money, and they wanted their existing loans to be paid. So the banks are panicking as well. They're like, hey, you still owe me $500 for this mortgage on a piece of property. We're demanding you pay it now instead of over the next 2 years like we talked about.
Ooh.
Because of that, a lot of people are going to lose their property. Many banks were also undercapitalized. Like I said, they didn't have a lot of money on hand either, just like individuals. They made high-risk investments. That means companies would come saying, hey, I have a new business idea. I need to take a business loan. The company falls apart. The bank lost out on everything. And had too many loans out at once. Once again, they didn't have much cash on hand. Individuals made runs on the banks, lining up in the hundreds to withdraw what they could. So once again, the banks are just going to be hit really hard. Many banks went into bankruptcy, which had many people's life savings and safety nets vanish before their eyes. Back then, there was almost no retirement systems. When you got too old and broken to work, You simply lived off your kids, your grown kids, and you lived off whatever savings you had. And that's a normal thing throughout society, throughout most of human history. If people are lucky enough to get old, they live with their grown kids and they help take care of the kids. They act as a form of child care, and education and stuff like that. That's a normal thing for grandparents. But back then, of course, a lot of also safety nets. That's emergency money for families. And so that vanishes. So if something really bad happens to the family, they had no money left for an emergency. So everybody was having a really bad time, and some people had some burps. So yeah, the main part here is that banks run out of money and banks have problems. They're going to try to fix the banks. We're going to see that later when we get to FDR. We get to Roosevelt number 2.
Whoa, Roosevelt number 2.
Yeah, there's 2. There was 2 President Roosevelts. There was Teddy Roosevelt, we already talked about, and there's going to be FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now they're related.
Really?
Yeah, well, we'll get to it though. Yes,
May I go to
you may.
No.
I just feel like sitting today. You're ready for the next one, kids?
Almost.
I don't really remember.
No rush, no rush. All right.
Oh my god.
I can't remember.
Of course.
Same picture. I think I used the same picture for like 3 different slides. All right, so now, like I've mentioned before, the Great Depression was also a worldwide depression. The United States isn't going to get hit as bad as some countries, like European countries, like especially Germany. They are just going to be totally ruined by this. And it's going to be one of the reasons why they turn somebody like a Hitler to get them out of it. The European economy was also tanking during this time. It had never fully recovered from World War I. In 1930, Congress passed the Hawley-Smoot tariff at the approval of President Hoover. This would be the highest set of tariffs in U.S. history. And it caused 23 other nations to respond with high tariffs against American goods. So if you recall, in the 20s, we already passed a set of tariffs that caused some problems with trade, but we get over it because of the strong economy. Hoover is going to respond with what we call protectionism. He's like, look, if I can get Americans to buy things made only in America and stop worrying about things made overseas, it'll help the American economy. What he didn't realize is by doing so, a lot of our companies needed to sell to other countries, and we needed to buy from other countries. So this tariff caused a tariff war, where it caused our biggest traders to stop trading with us, essentially, because they tariffed us really heavy too. And so once again, you're going to see people tinkering with things, and it's just going to make things worse. It's kind of like you have a wound. Instead of putting a Band-Aid on it, they keep just kind of poking their finger in it. By 1933, American exports were as low as 1905. So they essentially lost almost 30 years of gains. It's like a whole generation of improvement just gone. 95,000 businesses failed. Corporate profits were down by 60%. 9,000 banks closed their doors for good. And that's a big deal back then. Most towns and cities only had one bank. Or you might live in a little town, you have to go to the next town over to bank. So the loss of 9,000 was just a way where people all of a sudden you could not have investment for new businesses. New businesses almost always have to take a loan to get started. You couldn't also buy property because property too was too expensive for people to just buy outright, so they needed a form of lending. They didn't have a safe place to put their money. So this was a big problem for a lot of communities. Now all of a sudden they couldn't get themselves out of the hole. The depositors, that's normal people use the bank, lost around $2.5 billion of their savings. The money supply dropped by a third from 1930 to 1933. People were, instead of putting their money in the banks, were like burying them in their yard, like in jars, or they were putting it under their mattresses and waiting for better times. In history, we find that this has happened in other economic collapses as well. During the fall of Rome, like say in England, a lot of English Roman citizens would bury all of their gold in their field, hoping that maybe one day them or their kids or their grandkids could dig it back up for better times. Even today, sometimes farmers in England dig up like little small piles of ancient Roman gold and stuff like that. So that's still a deal. So the average amount of cash spent on consumer goods dropped by 45%. So that means everything was cut down in half. Profits. So if profits are down, people don't really care to keep businesses open. It takes money to make people want to work, and people are buying less. Instead, they're trying to rely off of like simple farming, things like that. They're trying to make the things they have last, which can be, it's good to be frugal, but it's not good for the system if everyone's doing it all hardcore.
Can we get something from Ms. Cook's house?
Like not spending a lot, saving your money. Yeah. So yeah, just know the main point of this is that the Hawley Smoot tariff, and you should also know the general idea that the banks were gone and that everybody was poor, really. I mean, no, that's the gist of it. Vanishing banks, lots of poverty. So, but you don't have to worry so much about the numbers. You really don't. It's okay if you do, but what's most important, I put that up there so you just have an understanding that this is something that it's measurable truth. It's real data. You ready to move along? Hey, sweet. All right. Same picture. What did I tell you? All right. So unemployment went from a low of 3% in 1929. So that means only 3% of the people who were physically capable of working and didn't have something else to do, like home care, could work. It went to 9% in 1930 and all the way up to around 25% in 1933. That's the average across the nation. Now, some cities, it was even higher because it was the cities that was hit the hardest, right? Now, of course, like we were talking about the COVID lockdown, it got even higher than that during the COVID lockdown. Luckily, that proved to be short-lived because right now I think unemployment dropped really, really, really low, well below like 10% again. So that's good. We're getting back on our feet.
Good.
Most experts, including the Secretary of Treasury, Andrew Mellon, or he was the guy who was in charge of money policy under Coolidge, and now Hoover kept him in, believed that the economy would heal itself if left alone. Hoover did not agree. Hoover summoned the businesses and finance leaders of the nation and urged industries to absorb the depression through reducing profits and not laying off their workforce or lowering wages. So Mellon was like, hey, let the economy work itself out like we did in the 20s. It'll be okay. Hoover said, no, I'm the president. I've been in charge of a lot of organizations and ran them correctly. I want to run the nation the same way. So what he did is he got which is more active than any president to ever been in this matter. And he told companies, will you please, for the sake of patriotism, don't fire people. Don't worry about making money. Just please make sure that workers are still working. But the thing is we're going to see it doesn't work all that long. He also pushed for public work projects such as the building of government buildings, highways, and the Boulder Dam, which would later be called the Hoover Dam. Many industries, state, and local governments answered his call to keep the impact off the poor. So a lot of states did the same thing. They were having public work projects. You're unemployed, fine. The state of Texas will give you a job, clean up the highways, or build a bridge, maintain schools. Unfortunately, many of these companies would eventually face bankruptcy. You can't keep a business open without making money. That's why so many restaurants have closed down over the past several months, especially the small ones.
The cell phone businesses,
Cell phone businesses too?
like, not like the cell phone, like.
Self-owned, yeah.
Small businesses.
Yeah, because they don't have like a corporate chain that's there to kind of like even out the pain from it, right? And so the thing is, though, I put businesses here, but also back then they didn't have, like, most orphanages or soup kitchens, food banks, and even a lot of schools were actually run by churches. And churches can only get money to do those things through private donations. Well, as everybody started getting less money, they had less money to donate to these churches. Therefore, a lot of these places, the people who are already poor didn't have access to food because companies are closing down. The churches are having to close down these places. People, all of a sudden, it was hard to take care of orphans. Hospitals that were run by churches couldn't really stay open that well. So we're seeing a lot of the things that are already there, social services, starting to get really hit real bad during the Depression. Same thing happened during the COVID lockdown. A lot of states, their food banks and stuff, started seeing a lot less donations. And so you would see long pictures of long lines of people waiting for food banks. But since people were unemployed, they couldn't donate. And since they couldn't donate, food banks didn't have cash. And since they didn't have cash, they didn't have food donations, they couldn't give to anybody. So you can kind of see how some things, like, they have the same rhythm as they move along. You all ready? Okay, cool. Moving right along. Hey, what do we see here? Finally, a different picture.
Abandoned.
Yeah, it looks abandoned. Little houses. Yeah, near a factory. These are shanty towns, right? These are where people who lost their homes, they all just kind of go together on public property with whatever bits of wood or tin they could find. They would build little houses. They call these Hoovervilles because a lot of people blame the Depression on President Hoover, right or wrong. So he was not very popular. Like, people were getting very mad. And that's how it is with every president, every single one we ever had. Whenever there's problems in the nation, even if it's not quite a president's fault, we get mad at that president. It's just how it is. It is how it is. I mean, every president, that happens. Some presidents are better than others. Some are worse than others. But yeah, all of them have probably had things blamed on them that's not quite their fault. Of course, Hoover did probably make some mistakes, but that's one of those things that you decide. The Hoover administration attempted more federal fixes, such as Glass-Steagall Act, to help increase the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve is kind of funny. Federal Reserve is it's not a branch of the government, but they determine how much money is in the economy. They determine how valuable money is, and they also determine how much interest can be charged on loans. So it's a weird thing. Also, the Federal Home Act to help with lending and mortgages. So they realized it's like, look, there's problems with the money. There's problems with people losing their homes. So we got to try to help fix this. But they definitely needed more help than that. As poverty increased throughout the nation, many called for more federal action. Hoovervilles, shanty towns for the homeless, grew along the nation in many sectors, including war veterans who demanded government assistance. I mentioned this before. World War I, of course, was some time ago, but you still had World War I veterans who, though there were hospitals for them if they were injured or sick, a lot of them were rendered so wounded they couldn't work. And so they were asking for like cash to live off of because they were like, hey, we got hurt for the country, but now the country kind of left us homeless. So what do we do? Despite unprecedented federal intervention, Hoover was viewed as a callous and uncaring president. So what you have here is you have a president who's trying to do more to help fix the economy than any president before. The nation's actually had other depressions, but because most people were rural and lived off their own farms, not that many people really noticed it, so it didn't really hurt the country. So despite doing all that, he's not very good at public relations. He's not very good about putting his image out there and making people like him. In 1932, Hoover was up for re-election, but due to his unpopularity, the Democrat Party had high hopes for victory. We'll do one more slide after this and we'll call it good.
Did they win?
Yeah, the Democrats won that one.
Good.
Whenever the economy's doing bad, that's one of the things that's like whenever a president, they usually get 2 terms. Like nowadays, they have to have 2 terms as a maximum. Whenever a president goes for re-election, they almost always win, unless the economy's junk. And so we're going to see Hoover, the economy is junk, and so he's going to lose. So it's usually, it's not like 100% thing, but it's a good indicator to let you know that it's probably going to switch parties. People blame the party in charge for right or wrong, and then they go to the other side.
Did you still want the president like that? What would have happened? What do you think?
Honestly, don't know. It probably wouldn't have been as many changes as FDR did, because we're going to see Franklin Delano Roosevelt is going to make the federal government essentially what it is today, right? Like all the 80 or 90 years later, like we're still got a lot of the same things. So he's going to change the face of it. The things he does during the Depression and during World War II. So make modern America. You ready for the last one?
Mm-hmm.
All right, good. Last one for the day. And there he is. So here he is, and he was actually crippled. So he's crippled from a disease called polio, which is largely wiped out in the world today, though it's kind of coming back in Africa. Usually kids catch it, and when they catch it, it deforms their legs and makes them very weak and unstable. So you see he's here. He's able to prop himself up against a chair. Here's his cousin and his wife, Eleanor, and they're both Roosevelts. They're not like close cousins, though they were related. And she's actually more directly related to Teddy Roosevelt, though he is distantly related to him. Because the Roosevelts were like a very wealthy German origin family who lived in New York. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, otherwise known as FDR, came from a wealthy family. He was Harvard educated and had great name recognition due to his wife's uncle, Theodore Roosevelt. Before his nomination, he gained popularity as governor of New York in 1928 in his struggle against crippling polio. It's a disease I mentioned. Though his actions had little impact on the economy in his state, Roosevelt used the power of the state government to provide relief and appeared to be more caring towards the plight of the people than Hoover. Roosevelt was very, very good about getting his message out publicly and and he was also good at speaking to people in a way that made them feel confident that he knew what he was talking about. Hoover didn't have that. He didn't have that moxie. Hoover was, like Roosevelt, we're going to see later, he's going to be very good at speaking across to the nation as president. When Roosevelt was nominated for president for the Democratic Party, he emphasized two key points. He would take any actions necessary, that he was capable of the presidency despite his partial paralysis. So he's like, I'm going to do whatever it takes to help fix the nation, and I am capable of doing it. And that is our last slide for the day. We're going to go ahead and end the stream here. We're going to lecture more on this Tuesday. Next week, Friday is going to be a beat as well. I sent the calendar out on the Google Classroom. Talk to you later.